Hello everyone and welcome back to the NPC Dungeon. As I said before, this episode is going to be all about how I deal with some of the more problematic or troublesome players you may come across. As you might have guessed, the way I go about this depends specifically on what they're doing, so I've narrowed it down to 3 different types that I'm going to discuss today. There are probably more than this, but I'm going to just stick with the 3. Also, I want to say that we're only going to have 2 episodes this week, so be ready for a story tomorrow if you're listening to this on the day it was released. But moving on, let's start with what is, in my opinion, the easiest type to deal with. So let's learn something. This first type I'm discussing is someone we've all had before. It's the player who will abandon the party, try to intentionally undermine everything going on in the story, spit in the face of every government official you put in front of them, every single NPC, and steal everything that isn't nailed down. You all know who you are. Now, I have a few ways of corralling this type of player. The first one I use in response to actions that probably won't end up upending the story, but are probably likely to cause problems if they continue. It includes stuff like stealing stuff that isn't nailed down, trying to burn down random buildings, stuff like that. And honestly, I'll be honest, I don't understand why this is a thing. Unless it's part of the story the DM has laid out for you, and I'm not sure why it would be. What's the point? Why are you doing it? But in terms of actually dealing with it, it's pretty easy actually. If it becomes a problem, I impose consequences. Law enforcement may get involved. This may anger the people. An organization they ticked off might send an assassin after them. This may result in markets and cities they can't go to without trying to hide or remain hidden without being caught by the authorities. And not only will this cause them to maybe think twice before doing whatever it is they did to get caught once before again, but it may also generate some new and interesting arcs. But as you might have guessed, there are a few things to be careful of in this method. One thing that I will say is that if your other players end up getting dragged into some kind of long quest because of something one of the party members did and they're not happy about it, no matter what you do, this particular player just doesn't stop and it begins to cause problems for you and the rest of your table, it might be time to pull it to the side. Obviously, don't talk to them in front of their players. You're not trying to embarrass them. You just need to be clear and direct and tell them what they're doing and why it's causing a problem. Often, that's really all it takes. But if they try to argue with you, if they continue to do whatever they're doing, session after session, and the other players notice it too, it might be time to show them the door. That's last resort, and make sure you talk it over with the players first. But again, last resort. I want to say, make sure you're not pushing them or aggravating them yourself. Your job is not to punish them. When I say impose consequences, I'm not saying to be passive aggressive and use the game to target them. That's unfair, it's immature, and it only cause more problems. I don't understand how people do this. The other person will only get upset and cause even more problems. Also, when you impose consequences, they need to be fair. If you have the world react one way to a player stealing, it needs to react the same way to the others. And lastly, please don't try to kill your players. Be lenient, give them multiple chances to get out. However, if they don't take those chances, then by all means, you have my permission, obliterate them. I even have a few stories about this kind of thing, and I may actually tell them very, very soon, so be on the lookout for that. But what if you have a player who's just trying to avoid the story, or is doing things that will deliberately derail what you have planned? Well, in the first instance, I think that being able to herd your players together, even if they might be doing different things in different locations, is a skill that every DM should have. And this comes down to knowing your players, knowing their characters, and knowing the environment that you've placed them in. If you want to know more about why knowing your players is really important, I have an episode that I just published not too long ago all about it. I'll be releasing an episode soon all about why knowing your characters and backstory is super helpful too. But for now, I'll say that if you have a player who just isn't involved and tries to undermine everything, it's up to you to find a common thread from their backstory or something that their character cares about and use that to bring them in. Find a way to tie them in with the rest of the players. It can be something as simple as thieves who are the bad guys steal something from them and they want to go get it back. Or maybe the player stole from the wrong person or their backstory and that person comes back to haunt them. Maybe they're related to the main villain in some way. Maybe there's an NPC they like and that NPC gets kidnapped. There are so many ways of doing this, and you guessed it, I have stories coming up about just that, so be on the lookout. Also, if you're going to do this, make sure it makes sense. Don't make really contrived plot lines and plot hooks for certain players. Don't target certain players. The same thing I said before with imposing consequences goes here as well. Be fair. And all the stuff I just said still applies to players trying to derail the game. It's important to plan for this. This is one of the many reasons why we need to know our players. In most cases, it's best to just make sure whatever they end up doing is exactly what you need them to do. Try to make sure that what they do to derail your story, what they are trying to do, plays right into your plans, plays right into your hands. For example, if your players need to bring an item back to a powerful leader and instead end up giving it to their warlock patron, you need to be ready. If they come back empty-handed, prepare to arrest them. If they don't come back at all, prepare to hunt them down. And if your players just flat out try to avoid an NPC who gives them a quest, that's fine. Surely your campaign has more than one thing going on in the background than just the one quest. Let's say the NPC would have given them the quest, one of the players to examine some old ruins or something, where they would have accidentally stumbled upon the bad guy's henchmen summoning a bunch of undead. Well, the players can still come across the camp of those people later on. Maybe they already did whatever they summoned the undead to do, and the players come across the next village only to see that it's been burned to the ground and over one of the zombies, with the person who's going to give them the quest half dead and buried under the ruins. Sometimes it's as simple as a well-placed perception check. Need your players to go through a certain door while they're about to walk away. Maybe as they walk, they happen to see it. And if they don't, that's fine too. You just bought yourself some extra time to rework your plans. If push comes to shove, you can usually find a way to put what they need to see in their path and work it into what's going on. If they need to come across some strange ritual in an obscure room and they go into the forest instead, guess what? The ritual could probably be put in the forest, and it could even be interesting for your story. There is usually a way to make it work, but as I said before, there are players out there who will just continually try to avoid and overturn everything. That's how they have fun. I don't get it, but some people are like that. And if this is the case, just like I said before, there's nothing wrong with taking to the side and talking to them, and just like before, if that doesn't work, again, they know where the door is. But that's enough of that. That's probably the longest point I have today, so the next point will be a little bit shorter, and it's all about the disrespectful player. As I said, this one's going to be kind of short because, in theory, it's easy. If I have a player making rude remarks over the table, my main concern is the fun and comfort of the other players. The table is supposed to be a place where everyone has fun and shouldn't have to worry about being targeted or made fun of or ridiculed or anything like that. If the comments are under their breath and directed toward me as the DM for whatever reason, I personally try to ignore it and bring it up with them after the session. After all, I don't want to sink to their level. I don't want to hold the game back any more than it already is. I want the other players to have fun. Now, if they start directing any comments at the other players or getting loud and obnoxious and just start holding things up and saying things to make the other players uncomfortable or anything like that, don't argue with them, don't fight, don't stoop down to their level. At least try not to. I understand how difficult that can be sometimes. Just say as clearly and as quickly as you can they need to stop. Honestly, chances are you won't have to. Sometimes other players might. They'll just hop to it before you even know what happened. That's happened to me before. If they don't, again, I want to say they know where the door is. You aren't there to babysit and you aren't there to put up with them. If they keep going, just ask them to leave. Arguing will only escalate matters and push the game even more off track. Sometimes you have to ask players to leave. It sucks, but you have to. And lastly, I want to say I'm not an expert in this. I'm not an expert in de-escalation. I'm not telling you what to do if a player starts trying to pick a fight or anything like that. That's not my place. I'm not qualified, and luckily, I've personally never had to do that. If that happens, you're on your own. I will not be held responsible. But all jokes aside, let's get to a slightly lighter topic and talk about what you can do if a player is either not focused, on track, or just being a little disruptive. Let's look at off track first. Just like I said with my last point, I try to deal with this one without slowing the game down too much. As I said, I don't want to be disruptive myself. So if I have a player who's either on their phone or just doing other things, often I'll just stop talking for a second, give them a look, not a mean look, just a glance, look at them for a second, and usually that's enough. If that doesn't work, I'll say, hey, you okay? Or something like that to get their attention. If that doesn't work, I'll just leave them be. Trust me, I know it can be tempting to get a little bit upset. I get it. Again, I know you put a lot of work into this game, and it may strike because it's kind of rude when a player is not engaged. But later on, when they don't know what's going on, that's on them, not us. They should have thought about that for later on when they try to stop the game, be brought back up to speed on something they would have known if they were paying attention. Now, obviously, I'm human, I get it. Some people just have a hard time concentrating, and that's fine. As I said in my episode on keeping the game run smoothly from the player's perspective, I've even been known to play a few moves of chess on my phone during sessions, so I get it. That's why I'm not super strict about phones as snacks. As DMs, we have to understand we'll be there for hours on end. Sometimes this just happens, and we have to understand that. As long as a player or players in question are involved and know what's going on, to me that's fine. We all get distracted or lose information and occasionally need a little bit of a refresher. And again, that's fine, but it becomes a problem if they consistently need to be reminded of what's going on over and over again. And then and only then is when I start implementing what I said earlier at the start of this point. And don't be afraid after the session to tell them that you noticed them getting a little bit distracted. Don't be mean about it. Maybe you and this player can work out a system of some kind. But what if they're just being disruptive? I'm talking side conversations. You know, like while I'm narrating. Sometimes if it's quiet enough or about the campaign, I don't really mind. But if it's loud or constant, well, the same applies here. I look at them, and if that doesn't work, I simply ask them if it can wait until I'm done narrating. If I have a player who keeps interrupting me, as long as it's not mean or anything, I really don't mind. If it's just 1 or 2 word interjections every now and then, I might even joke around with them. But if it's constant, I'll just ask them if they can let me finish narrating, and that usually works. Usually I get a quick laugh, and then we're back on track. The main takeaway here is be clear, be concise, and know there's no reason to be mean. And with that, I'm going to end this week's DM Advice episode. I really hope you found it useful in some way. Be sure to check out this week's story where I finish off Luna's story for now, and come back next week where I tell a few stories actually about players' characters who had to face some consequences for some of the actions that they did, and the long-awaited episode on player randomness. Thanks as always, and until next time, let's learn something.